Hey, welcome back. Luke here again with you, and welcome to the next video. We're going to continue building our hydrofoil board in this video, and we're up to the final step. So by the end of this video we should have a board that is ready to ride. That's the objective of this next step, is a full fine sanding and finishing so that the board's ready to hit the water. So very exciting. So I thought just a quick overview of how we're going to do it. I'm going to start by sanding it with the power sander again to 150 grit. If you remember from an earlier step, we had some of the resin was a bit tacky, and so I stopped sanding. So I still need to go over the whole thing now with the 150 grit. And then I've also got just the palm sander here, and I'll be using 120 and just sort of going around the rails again, making sure I'm happy that everything feels smooth. And then I'm going to go up to 220 on the palm sander and go over the whole board with the 220. And then I'm going to move to hand sanding with a flexible soft pad so that I can go around all the soft edges, all hand sanded, and then we're going to move to wet and dry. So anyway, that's enough for the introduction. Let's get it all sanded up, and then we can look at how we might finish it once it's sanded. So let's get into it. Now it's time to move to the hand sanding. So literally just taking a piece of sandpaper and a block and using the curvature of your hand to go around all of these soft surfaces, keeping your hard edge here, rubbing down the entire board. I like to go over the whole board and then flip it over and do the whole board again. So this is sort of the moment where we get to the board to the point where we're thinking, okay, this is kind of done. And so you're just going around and just doing any of those little touch-ups to the nose, any curves, just like really smoothing out any imperfections or bumps. So that's what I'm about to do now. And then after we do this, once we get to sort of 150 grit, 120, 150 grit, there's a bit of a crossroads that you can sort of start to choose a different way to finish the board. So I'm just going to go around it now, get it to that stage, and then I'll check back in with you, show you where we're at, and give you the options that we can go from at that point. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so now that we've been over the entire thing hand sanding, the goal is just to be running your hands around it, making it feel smooth. This is mainly cosmetic. We're just taking out those scratch marks from the sort of lower number, coarser sandpapers, and just making it feel good. This, you know, we've already done our sanding shaping with the power sanders, and so now it's just a matter of like when you're riding it, like how does it feel and how does it look? So we're just trying to make it, you know, just running your hands around it and just making it feel as nice as you want. So in order to do that, there's a couple of different options that surfboard manufacturers and foilboard manufacturers use. And so I just want to explain them, and then I'll tell you which one I'm going to choose. One is just to do a sanded finish. So continue sanding this up into wet and dry sandpaper, up to about 320 or 600 grit. By doing that, it leaves this really nice satin finish, and that is actually the finish that I do for all of my surfboards. So that's all I do now. I just keep sanding this through the grits. So I'll go 220, and then I'll go 320 with this, with the wet and dry sandpaper. It's a very smooth feeling sandpaper with some soapy water. So that's just a dishwashing liquid in some water, and you just sand it round and round and round, and that brings it up to a really nice finish. Then you just rinse it off and it's done. So that's the, you know, like I said, that's a sanded finish that I use for my surfboards, and some surfboard manufacturers will use as well. Another option is to actually clear coat it. So to spray this now with a spray paint, a 2-pack automotive paint, essentially in a clear, and that would help seal any of the imperfections, cover up any weave that we may have touched with the sandpaper, even tiny little pinholes or things like that. That's actually that can be a common thing that surfboard manufacturers do. So they'll just sand finish up to about 220 grit, clear coat it, and then just rub it down with the wet and dry after that. And it's sort of like an easier way just to, you know, make sure everything's sealed up and looks really good. That clear coat can really bring it up to a really nice finish, and it'll look really sharp. Another option, talking to my mate who makes surfboards, you know, has a company, is this. So it's like a floor finisher. There's different brands, but this is basically a floor refinisher for laminate or wood flooring, and they rub this all over this fiberglass and then Scotch-Brite it off. He said they can sometimes do 3 coats of it, just rub it on, give it 5 minutes, rub it on, you know, like that, and then rub it off. I've never used this, but I bought some because I thought it might be fun to actually try it, and that again will sort of really bring the board up to a quality looking finish and help seal even some of it's like a scratch remover is the way he described it. So it's mainly just to make it look good, but it can sort of help sort of fill in some of those weave areas, and make sure that all looks really sharp as well. So they're the 3 options that I have for you. There is one more thing that I wanted to talk about. If we sort of rewind to when we did that sort of scraping filler coat where we put the resin just to fill all of the little pinholes, instead of doing that, and I didn't mention it at the time, but instead of doing that, what we could have done is a finishing coat of resin, which is essentially like the filler hot coat that we did in the previous step. So we'd actually tape off the rails again and paint it on, but this time try and paint it on quite thin. Just to give you how the steps that would have been. We would have done the lamination, then we would have done the filler coat, then we would have sanded the filler coat to 80 grit just to make sure it's all like very close to how we want, similar to what we did. But then we would have taped off the rails again, painted on with a paintbrush again more resin, and then let that set, flip it, taped it off, let that set, and then sanded the whole thing up. That's called a finishing coat, and it's a whole second step of resin. And what that does is allows you to really then do the sanding finish, which we're going to be doing here, but making sure that you've got plenty of resin so that you can really bring that up. And so some surfboard, like a premium surfboard, like a longboard that's you know, getting finished to a high quality, or even these foil boards that really need to be watertight, that can be really common, is to do that second full coat. The downside, of course, is you add weight because you're mixing up all that extra resin. And so these other ways are sort of trying to keep the weight low, but also sealing the board up. But I did want to mention it. So lots of different things for you there to think about. And I don't mean to be confusing, but I just know there's a lot of ways that, you know, that you can do this now. And a lot of, you know, even professional surfboard manufacturers all do it slightly differently to get to their finished product. And so I did want to just explain that. So back to what I'm doing is I'm just going to sand this now to 320 grit, wet and dry. That's the finish that I like. I like that matte sanded look. I don't really like the high gloss looks, even though it does make the carbon pop and things like that. I would rather it just to sort of be a matte black with a matte sort of, you know, this matte sort of mint green that we've mixed up here. And so I think I'm just going to continue sanding now into the wet and dry and bring it up to the finish that I want. I'll get it to the wet and dry, and then I'll have a little look at this floor finisher and see if I want to rub it on there, but I'm a little skeptical of it. But he assures me that a lot of brands actually do that exact thing. They rub down with these floor finishes to finish it. So but I might try that now, or I might try it on a different project, but we'll see. Okay, so let's keep sanding. So what I'm going to do, 320 grit, like I said, water, you just pour it on, just rub the whole thing down, and it should bring it up into a really nice finish. So let's keep going. So once you're finished with the wet and dry, you can just get a hose and a rag and just basically get all of the powder and slurry rubbed off. Okay, and so then bring it in and just towel it off. Make sure any of that residual residue is rubbed off. But that, to me, is a finished product. This is, like I said, how I finish all of my surfboards. This is totally fine just to leave it exactly like this now. It feels good, it's functional. But as you can see, as it's starting to dry, we do start to see those minor scratches start to come through. So particularly on the black background like that, you start to see that white. So it's at this point that we can decide whether or not we want to finish it with something like the Rejuvenate or just leave it as is. In the interests of this video and showing you guys how it works and trying it out for myself, let's try this floor finish. So I'm going to rub this on now and let's see what it does to these scratches and see if it makes this board pop or not. So let's do it. So the instructions that I've got is you apply it with a rag and then you let it dry and give it multiple coats, like even 3 coats. So you can see it definitely has brought that carbon right back up. It is removing those scratches, but how long it stays like that, I'm not sure. So I've just given that about 10 minutes to dry, and that definitely looks like it's really has removed all the scratches, and it feels good as well. So the final step was just to rub the sort of dry surface down with a Scotch-Brite, just to smooth it off, I guess. That actually did a pretty good job of just removing some of those scratches. Still not glossy, it still kind of looks kind of matte, feels really nice, got a real satin feel into it. So anyway, that's fun to try. By all reports, this is something that some manufacturers use, so it's fun to try it out. Can't speak for the longevity of it, of course, but that will, you know, we'll see how it performs over time. Well, guys, this thing is ready to ride pretty much, so really getting pumped to get this thing on the water. So the next step, we're just going to get it set up. So we'll put the traction pads on, I'll get the foil mounted, just make sure we're all set and ready to go. So after that, it's time to test it out on the water. So firstly, just wanted to briefly touch on the vent plug. I put this back in when I was doing the wet sanding to make sure I didn't get water in the hole. But when you are putting the vent plug back in, you have to be gentle with it. They're not very strong, it's just plastic. So you sort of just get it to finger tight and then maybe a quarter of a turn so that that rubber washer O-ring just sort of presses on the seat of the bottom of the plug. So just pay attention to that. You need to make sure it goes all the way down so you definitely don't have a gap under the O-ring, but then you don't crank it up. It's just like a quarter of a turn just so that rubber just squeezes down and makes that a watertight seal. So let's talk about traction. So there's a lot of different options, and if you want to just source something from a foil brand, then they'll have something that's, you know, probably really well suited to a board like this that you can buy, stick it on, and it'll be great. For me, I can source these surfboard tractions, and this is what I use for my kiteboards and foil boards. And what I've found that I really like above the rest is this sanded EVA. So it's this sort of slightly ribbed or sanded EVA, it's called. This one's similar, but you can see it's just got that sort of texture in it, but it doesn't have this kind of really pronounced groove pattern. I find that these actually offer better traction than these, even though these you would think have better traction. I find the sanded EVA is really, really good when it's wet and comfortable to stand on, comfortable to lay on, doesn't have all those, you know, pronounced grooves and stuff. And so this is what I prefer. And I'll just be using pieces to basically lay out exactly what I want. So now, next is, do you put a kick pad or a tail pad on or not? Completely optional. Of course, the positioning of where you put this pad, you don't really use the kick tail pad, right? You don't really use this because you always sit this back further than what you need it to be. So you never put your foot back into there. So it's not necessary, but what I do like about them is it's kind of a bit of a handle. When the board's floating, you can kind of control the board a little bit by having that raised area. What I would recommend you definitely don't do is have a raised arch. So some of these have an arch in the middle. Really don't like that. I find that really uncomfortable on my back foot if I ever do have to go over the top of the arch for foiling. For surfing, it's great, but for foiling, I really don't like the arch. The position of where you're going to stand is determined by where your mast is and where your foil is. I know for me personally that my back foot only ever comes to the screws that are towards the nose of the foil. So if I put this on here, I know that my back foot will be like this, back foot here. And so sometimes I'll go a little bit back, just sort of onto the top of the mast, and sometimes I'll go a bit forward, but it's always right about here. So I know that my back foot is probably going to be here, and if I slide this back, then it'll probably be here. So I know my back foot's going to be in this range. And so knowing that, you can sort of stand and say, okay, so it's going to be around about here, so my front foot's going to be around here. So based on how you do your board, that's exactly the way I would recommend that you start. Look at where your track is, come sort of to the front of your mast. That's probably where you're going to your back foot is probably going to be. You can eye that up on the board. So I know it's right about there. You can put a pencil mark here, but I know my back foot's going to be about there, which means my front foot's going to be about there. And so I'm going to bring my traction sort of to the front of the carbon here, and all the way back to my kicktail there, and I know that that will be enough surface area for me to be able to move around comfortably. Okay, so let's put the traction on. Now, funnily enough, I'm not convinced about the finish that we just finished the board with, so I am just going to very lightly sand this area back with some 320 just to make sure that I've got a really good surface to get adhesion for my EVA, and then I'm going to start sticking these pads on. Alright, so the traction's on. I put another strip in the center there just to make that a bit wider. Put a couple of stickers on. So next we can dry fit the base plate. And so I find that with the T-nuts, it'll either be a 25 or a 30mm screw depending on how deep these are, how thick your base plate is. And so the way you can test it is basically we screw the screw in, and you want the thread to pretty much come all the way out, like not too far, but enough that you're getting that full like strength from that thread. And then when you put it down into the track, you can screw it now just by hand. So I'm just screwing that in by hand, and that will eventually hit the bottom. So now the bottom of the screw is hitting the bottom of the track, so that's the maximum. And so then you can put your base plate there and see, oh, is that going to get it? And that to me is not going to get, it's not going to be enough. So like we would have to screw that screw down into this countersink, and that would drive that screw into the bottom of the track, which we don't want. So for this setup, it's going to be a 25mm screw, so we can just check the same thing here. And this is, this is just the dry fit for the first time, just to make sure we're using the right stuff. So that will go in, and now that should screw. Pretty much you want it to screw kind of flat onto the track there, and then you know that that's going to be able to pinch that down without causing any binding problems. So then we can set all the T-nuts up, and then we'll just tighten them up and make sure that we don't have any problems, of course, because we don't want this to be a problem down the beach. So just make sure everything's sitting nice and flat, all tightens properly. That all looks really nice. So I just threw the rope in for the leg rope, and that is it. So the board is ready to ride. So actually some good wind tomorrow at the lake, so we're going to get up there and give it a test, so can't wait. Thanks again for watching, guys. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video where we get it out on the water.